your background, how you got interested in sports,
Hmm.
youth side. So over to you.
Okay, sure. So the short story, I guess, is basically growing up in a small community in Sweden, in a small city, and kind of playing sports was a very natural part of just growing up. So started playing soccer when I was 5, and just kept on for 11 years. Uh, that's the way you did it, and had a lot of friends there, grow a lot. But then kind of went into coding and programming when I was 13 or so, and that interest also starting to take more and more time, and as you can imagine, those two eventually kind of combined, which led me into my entrepreneurial journey. But sports has always been a very big part growing up. Um, but I've never really had ambitions of becoming a pro or anything. It was just there because I had fun. I actually think that's where most kids and youth are. They're part of sports because it's fun. It's part of growing up. It's where you have your friends, rather than an ambition of becoming a pro in the future.
Okay, very interesting. And a very nice combination, I would say, very innovative combination. So, sports, I can relate myself. I was big on sports in my school days, but somewhere all that fizzled out when I hit the professional side. So, I don't know how
Mm.
you managed to go into programming because generally I work a lot in tech community, meet a lot of startup teams, and there are stereotypes around different professions. So, when we talk about programmers and software, generally the society believes that they are the geeks, they are into the computers, and it's like when you are with the machines, you are kind of cut off from the outside world. How did you manage to marry the two things?
Yeah, we have to imagine this was quite a while back, at least, as well. So it was kind of in the beginning when a lot of Swedes started to get their own kind of home computer through that kind of state-funded program that was very popular. Um, but I guess I already have a lot of my roots in sports, and that was really part of being a kid. I wouldn't let that go that easily. Um, but starting coding and creating those kind of first HTML web pages with funny moving GIFs, like that was my journey into where I am right now. But I've never really seen them as contrasting each other or taking attention from each other, rather two different parts of life.
And how do you think see these progressing? Because of course, I was reading an article that there are more than 70,000 in terms of people shortage in the tech community, which is purely the development space. How is the sports side? You think with all this technology coming in, is it kind of our involvement in sports and healthy activities going down, going up? Any thoughts over there? Youth, how do they see sports? Because you work very closely with youth.
Yeah, exactly. I think that many can agree that the kind of positive impact of sport is massive. There's a lot of studies on this
Mhm.
topic as well. It's like everything from creating more healthier lifestyles to the kind of friendships that you build together in those sports communities and in those teams, but also developing and growing into leaders by taking responsibilities that you do when you're part of a team or a sport. But I think also maybe even more important today than ever, how sport can kind of bridge cultures and bridge backgrounds. I think many can agree that there is a lot of positives that sports bring to society and the individuals. But well, as we are today in the world, unfortunately, participation and engagement are on the decline in youth sport, and the pandemic has by no means helped in this. So it's everything from alternatives being more attractive and more kind of instant rewarding, social media, for example, struggle to get parents to be engaged in their sports life because we get more and more stressed
Mhm.
ever. Time management is an issue for many parents. But I also think that youth sports in general have a quite low, you call it, digital presence. The kind of physical world of doing sports isn't really represented in the digital world when it comes to the attention it gets. So I think other things get more attention, which also becomes more popular, and that's a challenge. So sports have taken big steps in digitalizing itself, but it's still very far behind, I would say.
Yeah, but I think you bring a very interesting point. First, I go back and where you brought out the positive benefits like healthier lifestyles, friendships, growing into leadership, because leadership is a huge thing. When you work in teams, it's a huge lesson before you go and work in leadership teams and management teams in your careers. How does that work on the actual ground? How do you create those relationships and bridging culture? Very interesting point over there. But I agree when you say that sports are kind of not that level of so maybe still big events are there which kind of get their engagement on social media, but the general sporting engagement that is not there on social media. So great points over there. How did your journey with Heja start? Or if we go back to even Laget time, would you like, let's go back over there, like where did it
Yeah,
all
sure.
start? How did it start? Did it start in a garage or something? Just interested in knowing that.
Well, almost. So a cellar, to be precise.
Okay, I like it.
But
Yeah, seller.
yeah, we actually have to go back 19 years. So
Okay.
when I was 17, so then you can calculate how old I am. But so we got this opportunity to create a school company, or kind of company project in school. And me and my co-founder thought that, okay, this might be something interesting. And remember, 19 years ago, the term being an entrepreneur wasn't really that big in Sweden. An entrepreneur was someone who was a manufacturer, builder, basically. So it was quite new for a lot of people, and especially in a smaller city like we grew up in. So we got this opportunity, felt like, well, this could be a nice thing to just do for a year, and then, well, that snowballed basically. So we did that for a year, said, well, this is something that we can continue doing. So we started with creating Laget.se, which is a platform for the Swedish youth sports market, where you support communication, collaboration, administration within the teams, the clubs, the board, kind of the entire ecosystem of youth sports. So quite a big platform trying to do a lot of different things. Well, then after the final years in school, my co-founder was entering the military and said, well, I can wait for a year and we'll continue this when you're back. So I did that. I studied a bit, and when he was back, we started working with the company full time. So I have this joke of my mom said at a very early stage that she was asking if I should get a real job sometime. And I think that maybe kind of summarizes also the idea of being an entrepreneur back then. But I never had a real job because I continued to be an entrepreneur, building companies. And basically that was 19 years ago, and we founded Laget, that continued to grow into a very big platform, have over 2 million active users in the Swedish market today. So become a very big platform in Sweden. And then eventually, I think it was 4 years ago, we sat down, me and Joanna, felt like maybe it's time for another journey. So we thought long and hard on what to do, and said, well, we've been within this space of digitalizing youth sport for a very long time, probably longer than most others. And we know this space a lot. So while it could be interesting to do something very different, we wanted to kind of continue down that path, basically due to our big passion of youth sports growing up ourselves. So yeah, we founded Heja, and we said, if this can't reach at least 100 million users, it won't be interesting. So that was the ambition from day one. And Heja, to keep it short, is a social platform for youth sports across the world, where we support communication, administration, both within the teams, but also allowing the individuals, the parents, and the players to develop. And also now going into more the community side of things. So starting to connect people, that's within the small things like the club or the league, or the bigger pictures like within a sport or across the world, to support each other. Much alike what you're doing in Startup Grind as well.
Very interesting. So
So
you'll
that's what
call
we've
it
done.
a community.
Yeah, a social platform for youth sports.
Okay, very good. I advise a lot of tech entrepreneurs, and usually when I see most of the tech products and their pitches, they are usually over created, and so there's a usual tendency among entrepreneurs to kind of over create or overthink and create a fat solution, while the market needs a much stripped down version of it in the first go. So if you go back to rewind, let's rewind back again to 19 years old. You said platform. What was the initial shape for the first couple of years for Laget? If we could, like, was it like, we assume like it's like 19 years ago, so I don't know how what was it looking like?
Yeah, so we started with a simple idea of getting a free homepage for your team. That was the slogan.
Okay.
So you registered, you got a team, which is like a basic CMS for things to add your practice and games, knowing attendance and stuff like that. But getting a homepage 19 years ago, that was a big thing.
Okay.
So that was cool. And then it became less cool, and you started to going from just having kind of homepages to actually have a platform where you can do a lot more. But so we built a product and a platform where we dug ourselves quite deep into the Swedish ecosystem of youth sports. We started doing integrations in Sweden, etc., and we felt like it just becomes harder and harder to scale this if we want to take that step internationally. So I think that was a big reason for deciding to do something new within a new product, because basically, if you want to reach 100 million users, you need to go globally and you need to do it right away. So we took a step back, said, okay, basically exactly what you said. What does the market need? Well, most coaches and parents and players out there are using WhatsApp and Messenger or email or text to communicate. While that works, it's still not a good solution because it just gets messy quickly. You don't know which people have received information. Just asking, okay, how many people are attending the game? And you start to get texts and messages and everything. You need to summarize that. And then someone posts a funny video and it's just a shitstorm. Yeah, so we wanted to keep it simple. So much more towards WhatsApp, but when you have scheduling, you have more kind of purpose-built features. So few but powerful features, but are kind of well-designed, but purpose-built. I think that's the general success for social companies that target a vertical.
Okay, very interesting. So Laget right now is purely Swedish market, I presume, or is it in other Nordic countries as well?
Yeah, exactly. It's Sweden.
It's purely Sweden. And then as you move to the new platform, did the work in the previous one help in terms of traction, or did you need to start from zero in terms of acquiring users or building traction for them? How did that go?
We started from zero. And that's tough because it regardless, there are of course exceptions, but regardless, it takes time even for great products to start to grow. And there's usually always things you need to change. You need to adapt your communication. You need to tweak features, etc. But we started from scratch. We said, if we want to go big, we start with the US. So that's what we did. So we first launched in the US market, which for many people was very strange. Like you can't do that basically. But we used what's available, which is Facebook marketing, Google AdWords. We started calling people in the community saying like, hey, do you want to promote Heja as an ambassador? And they did. So we gathered around 100 ambassadors across the world, which got paid for every time they brought in teams that also starting to use the platform. And that really kickstarted growth. But we've always had the idea of, if we want to become really, really big as a B2C product, we need to do that through virality. There is no other way. I think you can look at most big B2C products today. They've not grown because they've bought those users. They've grown because they have great products combining with virality, which is driven by great product-led growth.
Very good point. And I think that's something you touched upon, a very interesting thing when you talked about community, social interaction, being a social community. That's where I think it's also very important to, because social media or the communication space has become so broad, you need to slice it. You need to create a vertical. We actually had a few months ago, Yuan Atbi here at Startup Grind. He was talking about Fishbrain and about vertical social networks. And they had a huge success by just focusing on the fishing vertical. And interestingly, he also talked about the same point, because they also eyed US as their main expansion market, because for them as well. So maybe there is something. And a couple of months before Johan, we had Caroline Wallerud from Volumental. So they also, so for some reason, I find some connection in these stories, like all three entrepreneurs expanding to the US. There must be something about the US market. Yeah, but it could be like Nordics, like one of the reason that I see with early stage, like startups going into scale up stage or startups in their teething issues, they talk about Europe as a market with multi-language and different. When you have several countries, you have a big market in Europe or EU, but then there is geographical and language segregations, which probably make it difficult for you to scale fast in an early stage. And US being a single language and single. Anyway, great points. We already have a question coming in from Sid. What's the value proposition and target audience for Heja?
Yeah. So basically, we have coaches, parents, and players on the platform. Coaches use Heja to simplify communication, knowing which people are attending games and practices, sending out important information, knowing that at least one parent per kid have seen this, etc. We're also collecting fees on the platform. On the parent side, it's kind of the same, but from the other perspective, getting all the information in one place instead of getting some through email that you need to search for and then something else in a text message. So all the information is in one place. I think a story that we've heard throughout the years is that coaches say like, I'm just sending out information, no one reads it, they just ask the same question all over again. And the parents say like, I get so much information, I don't know where to look. So like no one is happy. So I think that's what we're trying to solve, that, okay, you have one place where everything is gathered and it's structured. So you have kind of the calendar in one place with all the information connected to that. You have the social communication in one place, and you have the important updates, because those require different attention and different features as well. So that's one part of Heja. And then going into personal development, like we're looking a lot into supporting with drills through video right now, and being able to simplify the personal development of the kids. That's another aspect of it. But then also really doubling down on the community right now, allowing kind of coaches and parents to start to connect across the platform. It could be simple things like you're moving to a new city and you want to find a team for your kid to play in, or you want to schedule a friendly game with another team. Who's available? All those kind of things that happens today, but in a not so efficient way.
Very interesting points. And if I summarize it for the community that's listening in, so one place for sports info, everything compiled in one place. I think that's a huge benefit, because you're then not looking around, and sports are time sensitive. So it's like you need to have that in one place. Personal development was another angle that you mentioned, and community, and where you talked about if you move to a different place, like finding a sports team. So I think great summarization there. We have some more questions coming in. Before I move to, let's say, whose question is there? Niels has a question. I had a question before this. So Niels, I'll just push it there before your question. How is it monetized? Like sports, so Sweden being, for example, a welfare state, and most of the activities, even education, is state sponsored. So how does the model work, or does the model have to adapt to different countries as you scale out? If we can have something on that.
Yeah, sure. So take a step back. So we're today in a lot of different countries and markets. And I think one very interesting realization that we had as a theory in the beginning that we could then kind of confirm is that most people, for most people, youth sport is something very local. It's something that you do where you grow up. It's something that's part of your community. And that have created a feeling that youth sports and the grassroots level of sport is very unique for a country. Like Swedish youth sport is so unique with volunteers, etc. But when you start looking at this on a global perspective, you actually realize that it's very much the same regardless of where you are. Everywhere you have kind of coaches volunteering, parents being there supporting. I guess it could be more or less commercialized because in Sweden you get a lot of state funding for it, because so you don't require as much from the parents for the kids to play. But the kind of foundation for it is very, very much alike, regardless if you look on the US or Sweden or even South Africa.
Got it. But I think there is some sort of precedent already there with the kulturförenings and sports idrottsförenings. So there is some sort of a payment mindset there, even at the user level. Even if we go beyond the core market, your application, but generally even the sports side, so there is some sort of monetization model that is existing.
Exactly. That was your question, the monetization. So the kind of path that we chose, and we've tried a lot. You never really know what works until you find it. But we wanted to find something that was also very scalable. We think of scalability in most of the things that we do. So can we create a product where it works regardless of sport, country, age group, etc., that allows for scalability? Can we find ways to promote Heja through pay channels that are scalable? That's great. So always think of scalability. And it's the same thing with monetization. So finding something that works everywhere, because that allows us to keep being a small team that can focus. So we monetize in two ways. The first one is through a classic freemium model. So we have a free version and a premium version, where we have one package for coaches and one package for parents and players. And they're paying for coaches around $10 a month, for players and parents around $3 a month. And then we have partnerships as the second side of things. So, which is something that we just launched. And there's a lot of different companies and different products that want to reach the kind of engagement that you get with being this kind of hub for the day-to-day of being part of sports. So the the average user is using Heja around 40 times per month. So they're using Heja quite a lot, and that's the average, looking at monthly active users. So if we can utilize that engagement, that repetitiveness, and monetize on that by bringing in partners into the platform, that's something that we believe a lot in.
I think that's a great idea. You become a universe for sports. I think Johan was also, when he was here like a year ago, year ago, I think. He also was experimenting with that idea. I think they have launched that feature, like enabling e-commerce, like you could shop around in the platform. Because eventually, if you are into a universe, that's the best place for you to make even buying and selling decisions. So great progression going forward. Niels, we are to your question now. You had a question on, with some coaches, parents being of older generation, not being very technical, how did you get them comfortable using your platform? So good point. Great question, Niels. So you have these three sets. So coaches, maybe they are time pressed, they have a job as a function. Parents, they are more protective. Are things, grades, everything going well with my kids? Am I paying for it? Are they being, and then kids themselves playing, and they being of different ages, different backgrounds. How do you unify the user experience?
Actually, it's a great question. So first of all, where we come from, where we started a lot with kind of providing a good utility tool, and now moving more into other parts of the product. We started out with also being dependent on the coaches. So we get the coaches, they find the value, they bring in the parents. The parents probably say like, why do we need another app? Like, can't we just continue with WhatsApp? But then we take a very big responsibility as a platform to really show the value for the parents, that this is a platform that are as much for them as it is for the coaches that initiated this. And I think this is an important takeaway, to be able to bridge that friction that it might sometimes be of starting to use a new product, basically regardless of how tech savvy you are. But if we can show that this provides value, people will try to get started and have a positive kind of start to it. Surely there will be users that don't understand the product, but we put a lot of emphasis and time and resources into making it simple, because simple drives activation, it drives engagement, and those two drives virality. So if we can go from having a coach promoting Heja and saying it's great, and trying to pull in other users in other teams, or other teams that pulls in other users, or if you can get a coach but also 20 parents to promote Heja to their community and their friends, it's quite a big difference in how many promoters you have and how many that drives that virality.
Okay, great point. And I think Freak, you had a point on virality, because we had great conversation. What is the virality mechanism outside word of mouth that you use? Okay, so we I think partially answered or fully answered the question, like you were saying. So it's like who gets onboarded when, and then you were talking about the value, like anything that you create out there as a product or a service needs to have a tangible value for the user, because if that is there, it will move to the next stage. So I think that's a very basic metric, or the way Virality is built. We have a question from Scott here. Hi, Scott. What differences do you see in market and cultures between US and Swedish market? Are there different emphasis in features, similarities? Which brings me into do you get pressure on adapting the platform?
I can just add one thing to the previous question, which I think is relevant. That okay, so word of mouth is part of virality, but it is very hard to measure word of mouth. So if you can measure virality, you can improve it. I think that's a key takeaway. Like, if you can measure it, you can improve it, you can tweak it, you can break it down, you can do experiments around it. So we measure virality by seeing, okay, how many teams and users that come into the platform has a connection to another team already on the platform. So we can track how teams come in by a relationship to another team, by you're a parent in one team and you're a parent in the second team, or you're a coach in one team and you're a parent in the second team, etc. So we can track that, and that is mainly driven by the synergy effect of you gathering all of your kind of youth sport in the same place. If you have one kid playing in one team, well, it's beneficial for you to have it in the second team as well, and we can track that. And actually, that effect of getting everything in one place, that covers around 90% of the growth today. So that's the organic growth. And I think that word of mouth, nice, but it's really hard to work with product-led growth if you can't measure it. Going back to your question, we don't see that many differences when it comes to how we approach the market on the paid side. So how we bring in new users through to paid acquisition. I think some wordings might have different weight to it. So the cost of the product isn't as impactful in the US as this in some European market. The association of sport is that it doesn't all have to be free in the US, as it in a better way is in Europe, or in a bigger way is in Europe. But in general, we find it quite equal in the way that we find success in our messages and in our channels and in our creatives when we do paid acquisition.
Okay, very interesting. Scott, I hope you got your answer. I have a follow-up question to what Scott has, because you're essentially a base minimum three-sided platform with coaches, with parents, and with youth. So again, going back to the what Scott raised over here, is the adoption sequence the same, like coaches to parents to youth, similar across markets, or have you found differences when you entered these markets?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The adoption sequence, like, because you're a three-sided platform, is it always that the sequence of coaches, parents, and kids works the best, or did you have to improvise based on each market?
It is actually the same, but what we are moving into today is a platform that also allows the kind of individual parent or player to become part of the platform without being part of a team first. So I think that's the transition that we're doing with now taking the planned steps on initiating material for personal development, for example, and exploring the platform, knowing what teams and coaches are out there that you can reach out to, etc. So we are transitioning into being able to go into the platform from all roles, basically. But up until today, it has been a big focus on the coaches to grow.
Got it. Let's move to some more questions. Stefan, Mikael looks as good as he did from start of his business. Entrepreneurship makes you young. Yes, I can vouch for that. Okay.
It's just a filter. The use filter.
How do you work with commercial sites, sponsoring, sales, partnerships? That's a question from Torbjorn. Like, is it a big thing? Because if I go back on my notes from 5-7 minutes ago, you said that you are building that site now. The sponsorships and partnerships. But is it hard? It's easy? Like, how is this?
Well, we started just a couple of months ago. We have our first big partnership in place with the American Youth Soccer Organization. So we're the official app for them, which is great. Have over 300,000 people in the organization, so it's quite big. We're also working with getting more commercial partnerships, so integrating partners that want to reach the audience into the platform. I think there is a fine balance when you're building a social platform and doing that in a non-intrusive way. We have no interest of doing kind of the flashy banners all over the place. We don't believe that that's the way forward. But we do believe that if we can create value or have a mindset of wanting to create value for our users while at the same time making money on partnerships, I think that's a good starting point at least.
Okay, great point. We have a question from Alexander. Is Heja also available for sports organizations? That is, if you are running or building a global sport, a sport federation, etc., can you license Heja connected via for APIs or other software that you as a sport organization are using?
No, is the quick answer. But we are building kind of organizational features. We don't want to be or become an admin platform for organizations, leagues, or clubs, but we do see that there is a lack of connection, if you can call it like that, from those top organizations down to the actual active parents, players, and coaches. So if we can bridge that by simplifying the communication, where, for example, AYSO, American Youth Soccer Organization, can send out information through a chat message instead to a big group where maybe not everyone can answer, but using those more kind of modern formats, I think that's the way forward to start to create value for the organizations as well. But we don't want to go down the route of building a full-fledged kind of admin platform for those type of organizations. That's Understood. A different product.
Got it. Nikki has a question. Interesting talk. How do you reach the coaches in a scalable way?
Yeah, so I think it's quite, the answer is quite simple. So we use the traditional performance marketing channels, basically. So we have tried them all, but we fall back a lot on just Facebook and Google, to be honest, Instagram as well. We make sure to know our CAC, know our lifetime value. We also are quite good at understanding that lifetime value can be different for different cohorts of users. So depending on where users are in the world and what sport they play, they can be differently valued by us because retention could be different, conversion rate could be different. So we combine all of that and create lifetime values on a cohort level. So we know that if we get teams within a certain cohort, they're worth X for us, which means that we can spend X. So I think that's a way for us to have become better at scaling performance marketing. And then make sure that we keep below the threshold of the CAC.
Very interesting and very scientific, objective process. Great work over there, Mikael. And we have one more questions coming up. Do you describe your platform? Sid is asking, is it a marketplace or a social network? What would you choose?
I would rather say a social network, but also with some clear utilities. The way that we look at it, if you spoke about Fishbrain before, we can also take Strava as a good example. Like they have a core in providing a utility feature, so solving a problem that people have in a better way that they've done before. For Strava, it's about tracking your running, for example, or whatever it could be. And for Fishbrain, it's about recording your catch. And then on top of that, you build the ability to be an individual, to have an identity on the platform, so you can start to say, this is me, this is what I'm doing. So that's the difference between being a pure utility tool to also taking the step of being a social platform. And then on top of that, you start to add those collaborative features, where you, in actually both Fishbrain and Strava, you have the ability to collectively gather information on where to fish, where to run, what to do, what to wear, etc. So that's where it really becomes a social platform, I would say.
Got it. Got it. Torbjorn has a question. Who owns the data, Heja or the club customer?
Owns is a it's a bit of definition, I would say. We own the right to use the data in certain ways to be able to provide the platform, and use the tool and provide value. But there's of course limitations of what we can do with it as well.
Okay. Do you work intentionally with referral programs for these promoters you are talking about? If they refer and recommend other parents, coaches, and get a new team on board, do they get anything from that? I think it's going back to your virality discussion.
Yeah, exactly. Doing incentivized loops in different ways is something that is big part for many companies doing product-led growth. So we've tried a lot. We have new experiments out all the time. I think it's hard if to really be successful. And a key question is like, why should I care? So if we are saying you get $10 if you get a new team or a new coach signing up, money is usually not the way to incentivize people to make them care enough. I think there are really good examples of when this worked with the twist. So let's say you get X amount of money that you can use in our shop to buy these things. Then it becomes more tangible. So you say, oh, I can get a football for free if I do this. That's actually more intriguing for users in general. Another way of doing it is that you use features. So you lock up features by referring. But I'm not a big fan of kind of the pure monetized incentive. And I think there are few examples where it really works well.
Okay, very good point. Pratik has a question. Did you find any distress among parents or students in lack of infrastructure to participate in sport activities?
So there is a real struggle of getting parents involved in their kids' sport. So I think there are two sides of this. The first thing is that parents are actually the ones that usually becomes the coaches. So you ask like, can someone coach? And no one raises their hand until someone raises their hand. It's the same saying like, can someone be the treasurer? Like everyone looks away. So the coaches are essential for sport. Oh, sorry, the parents are essential for sport to exist in the first place. And the challenge is that it's quite time consuming to be a coach. It can be stressful. It's kind of unrewarding, while at the same time very rewarding for you because you see the kids grow. But if we can support with that, saying like, hey, we make it easier for you. We make it so less parents ask the same question all over again, or every time again. And but also then on the parents not being coaches, making their life easier so they feel like it's less of a hassle with my kids being part of sports because I get all the information I know. It's less stressful. If we can get them closer to their kids' sport, we actually see higher participation and also that the kids stay in their sport longer. We've been doing big surveys on this, on the impact, both of sports in general, but also the impact of Heja specifically. So we actually see a big increase in participation rate when we get the parents feel closer to their kids' sport. And we do that by showing just pictures of what's happening on the practice when the parents are not there, getting them to be able to engage in the conversation and the conversation not just being a monologue from the coach, but actually a dialogue where the parents can say like, great job, or hurrah or heja, as we say in Swedish.
Very interesting point, like getting parents involved to improve kids' involvement in sports. So I think that's the message. To promote a digital platform, raising sneak peek, we invite you to join as a. Okay, so Pratik has a message for the community. Let me see if there is one more question. Start a grind. Okay, very good. So we have the audience question. I returned to a couple of startup journey kind of questions just to get back to the topic of startup. Let's zoom out to the startup space a little bit. Has there ever been a funding challenge for you guys? You started in the last 4 years or so. Uh, and how was it even for Laget? Was it a self-finance thing? So if we can talk a little bit about funding, because that's a
Yeah,
big thing
sure.
when entrepreneurs are building their first companies or second companies, funding is a big, big thing. It can affect the speed
Yeah.
of startup and everything.
So Laget.se was fully bootstrapped.
Mhm.
We never took any loans. We never took any funding, actually. So when starting Heja, we realized very quickly like we need funding for making this happen as fast as we want it to happen. I was also a way to kind of be part of a different journey. Building a bootstrap company in our perspective is quite different than building a VC backed kind of go as fast as you can company. So I think this has been extremely valuable, and we've learned a lot from those two different journeys in our backpack. So with Heja, we raised our first round 1 year after launching, and then our second round 2 years after that. But well, funding is, with some few examples, always very hard and always very time consuming. I don't think it becomes better that you read on the front pages of company after company raising their new round, and everything just feels so damn happy. While the reality is that it's almost always a massive struggle to get there. But you don't read about that. You just read about the success story, and this provides the idea that it should be easy to raise money, which it's not. It's massively hard, and it takes a lot of time. Like I'm working full time with fundraising. We're active for months and months and months to make that happen. And you speak to so many investors, you get so many no's, you learn a lot. I think there is no other way, for me at least, to kind of accelerate in my personal journey as it is with fundraising, because basically you're being put in a room every single day with people that are smarter than yourself in certain areas, and they challenge you, and they say, have you thought about this, or why does it look like this? There's no other way to and you need to kind of respond to that very quickly, and to be able to respond you need to learn. So I think for a personal perspective, it's extremely valuable to fundraise.
Okay, but okay. Having said that, does it take focus off the ball when you're fundraising? Because it's a lot of effort, as you're saying, sitting, churning out numbers, scenarios, meeting investors, different rooms. Should startups rather focus on bootstrapping in their early journey? So if somebody is just building a startup, what should they focus on? Bootstrapping, or should they focus about raising money with a big vision?
Yeah, I think you know that there is no silver bullet here. there's no right answer. It comes down to what you want to build. Like some things you need to be quick, because if you're not, someone else will do it, and then you probably need to raise money. But if you have something that can take time, where it's not the winner takes it all, well, maybe you have the opportunity to kind of grow a bit slower. But also with the funding climate that we're in right now, I think a lot of people know that revenue and profitability becomes more and more important, which of course shift the balance in this in this question a bit.
Okay. Got
Yeah.
it. Got it. Brilliant point. We have Scott has a question. I think in the US, studies show that parents who focus on sports, especially dads, tends to lower boys' involvement in academics. Does Heya offer opportunities to link sports and academics?
No, not really.
Okay.
Well, we try to just make it simple for everyone involved. So in a way, maybe we can save time, which allows for that to consist in a better way. But it's not something that we've thought a lot about, to be honest, or seen as a big problem.
Okay. So Scott, thank you for the question. Maybe a point for you to think forward.
Exactly.
Mikael.
Exactly.
We are at the end of our discussion session. One last question for aspiring entrepreneurs out there who are trying or building their ventures. What would be your message? Like, what is one or two things they need to focus on in their early journey of building their startups?
I think really making sure, I'm generalizing a little bit right now, but
Yeah.
really making sure that you have your retention set. Like if you're building a digital product specifically, like knowing, okay, what is really retention? It's so easy to find a retention metric that looks good, and then you stick to that. But is that truly what defines retention in your product? Does that represent a repetitive value proposition that customers get from your product? And it's easy to fool yourself with finding something that it isn't really a good metric. So we've spent, I can't even remember how much time, but we've spent a lot on figuring out what is really the true retention metrics, and nailing that is important, because then you can work with it. And as you've heard, we're very kind of data driven in our approach in different ways. And I think knowing that makes a lot of other things simpler. Then for me and Johan, I think we both had a big value of actually having each other. So there's no right or wrong answer here, but for us, it's been massively important to have a co-founder to share those ups and downs with. I can't imagine building a company where you don't have someone to share that with, that fully understands what it means when things really seem to go south, or when things are just going your way, and being able to celebrate that together. So for us, it's been essential to have each other in that journey. And we've actually, as we've understood, building companies together now, and been together doing this for 19 years, which I think is quite unique also, especially starting from that early age when you change a lot as a person as well.
Very good points. So I think general advice for entrepreneurs out there: figure out your retention metric and find almost like a soulmate where you can take the journey together and have the same vision and value structure to make a difference or a dent in the society.
Yeah, if that's important for you, that's very individual, but for us, it's been very important.
Very good points. Mikael, a big thank you from the Startup Grind community and all the listeners out there. Thank you to you for coming in here.
Thank you so much.
Really inspiring conversation, touching on so many different areas: startup building, youth problems, digital platforms, social networks. Thank you so much for all the inspiration, and we'll catch up going forward and watch the journey as Heja expands further and further. 100 million users, that's where we are headed.
Exactly. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you.